very pleased to be here today with Kiowa Town Councilman Brad Belt and with KICA board member Kevin Donlon. We're going to be talking about a topic that's of great interest to the community, the Architectural Review Board, or the ARB. I'm Madeleine Kaye. I'm a member of the work group that was tasked with reviewing the ARB's authority, responsibilities, and processes. Kevin and Brad are the co-chairs of this work group, and they're here today to talk about progress that we have made so far. So, Brad, I'm going to start with you. Could you talk about why the group was formed and what our mission is?
Well, thank you, Madeleine. This effort grew out of a conversation that the town council had during its strategic planning meetings earlier this year, where we were looking at the issues that needed to be addressed by the council over the coming year. One that we identified as of critical importance was looking at issues related to architectural control on the island. And that was driven both by a number of concerns that have been raised by residents, our community members, about the process, as well as the fact that a development agreement with the developer and the town was set to expire at the end of this year. When we talked about it, we said it would be ideal that this would be a joint Town of Kiowa Island and KICA effort, given the fact that neither organization could address these issues unilaterally, and there were issues of common interest that need to be explored. So we reached out to the KICA board, and I'll turn over to Kevin as to kind of what transpired after there from KICA's standpoint.
Yeah, on that point, I think at KICA we felt like not only showing cooperation in the community, but a report that came from two entities would carry a lot more weight than just one of us. For me, when I was running for the KICA board, everywhere I went, I heard concerns across the island regarding the ARB. I felt, number one, it was important for us to put out some sort of baseline explanation or educational piece so that everybody was literally working on the same page in terms of their understanding of what the ARB can and cannot be. And also, I think we needed, for the first time, a clear community organized effort as to how to address the problems on architectural control and specifically the ARB.
And I would note in that regard that it's been pretty clear that there are a lot of kind of myths and misperceptions about architectural control issues on the island. Okay. And this is a critical part of an education process for the community.
And can you address some of the specifics about what we will be doing and what we are not doing?
Yeah, sure. I'll take that. I think our goal is to, as much as possible, analyze the facts and circumstances of the current architectural control, both the documentation as well as the practices that are in place, and then try to attempt to communicate a big picture recommendations and solutions for what the community is looking for.
Okay, thanks. And Brad, besides the three of us, can you tell us who else is on the team?
We are also fortunate to have the expertise and wise judgment of my fellow council member, who's actually in the room with us, but you can't see him on camera, Michael Heidingsfelder, Kevin's colleague on the KICA board, David DeStefano, and then also three other members of the community, Mark Kamens, who is a well-known architect in the community, Peter Schneider, and Beverly Fierro.
Okay. And you may have covered this, but why did you feel it was important that KICA and the town were working jointly on this project?
I think Kevin really touched upon that. When we first had the conversation within the council's strategic planning retreat, there were issues that were unique to the end of the development agreement, but that would only scratch the surface of issues related to architectural control on the island. Mm-hmm. And again, not only was it, in a sense, necessary at the end of the day that KICA look at these issues as well as the town, this was an opportunity to foster collaboration and cooperation, and that's something the community's been looking for. And I think as this process has unfolded, it's a great example of how we can cooperate and collaborate on issues of importance to the broader community.
I thoroughly agree. Okay, Kevin, does the group have objectives or an action plan?
Yeah, we put together a two-part plan. I think phase one is what I call information gathering and education. We've gone through governing documents. We've interviewed key people in the community. We're going to attempt to solicit more feedback from the community, but it's really a function of laying everything out on the table. The thing we intend to move to next is recommendations. I think that'll come later this summer and in the fall, but once we've gathered and we feel like we have a complete picture, only then will we move to trying to look for answers.
Has this process been more complicated or complex than you anticipated at the outset?
I'll start with that one, Kevin, and you can jump in. Kind of a very brief history lesson with regard to kind of people say, where did the ARB come from? There's actually, and people may not realize this, it's based on a almost 50-year-old document that was submitted. It has the extraordinarily mundane title of the Declaration of Rights, Restrictions, Affirmative Obligations, and Conditions Applicable to All Property on Kiowa Island, typically referred to as the General Covenants, that we, whether you realize it or not, have all subscribed to, essentially, when we bought property in the island. And this started with the Kuwaitis, and there's a provision in this 12-page document that says the company, which is the developer, has approval authority over buildings and alterations on Kiowa Island. And that's been the primary source of authority for the last 50 years. Now, what we learned is, in addition to this, there are a lot of other documents that need to be reviewed, and those will be laid out in the report that we'll be filing. But there also are a lot of processes and practices that exist within the town and with KICA that touch upon architectural control issues. So it has been a little bit more complicated than we might have first imagined.
Yeah, I would add that while the documents are complicated, they're not lengthy, and so much of our architectural control regime is handled by our staffs and just convention and the way things have always worked. I think a lot of it has worked well, but it's not written down, and so it was that much harder to dig into exactly where these processes were coming from, but we think we've pulled it all together at this point.
And for community members who are interested in digging a little bit more, are these documents accessible to them?
Yeah, in fact, in our report, we're going to hyperlink to where they are, either on the KICA website or the ARB website or at Town of Kiowa. I think anyone who reads the report in detail and wants to go a step further, it's all out there. And then I think they'll realize what is well documented and how much of it is, a little bit of folklore along the way as well.
Brad, we are about 3 months into some pretty intense work on this project. What has the group observed so far?
One of the things which you just touched upon is that there is a lot that we didn't understand at the outset. As council members, as KICA board members, as planning commission members, we would tend to be a little bit more knowledgeable about some of these issues than perhaps kind of a typical resident or part-time homeowner would be. But I think we had to learn a lot. So it was a review of a lot of different documents. It was conversations with the town staff, with the KICA staff, and other stakeholders to get a better understanding of what some of the processes were. But that has revealed some of the things that, Kevin, perhaps you can touch on, that we've learned from that our own educational process.
I think, and I'll add to that, there's probably 4 other areas we touch on in the report. We're very upfront to say that we think architectural control on Kiowa is very important. We're not looking to eliminate architectural control. We're looking to improve it, but it's made the island as beautiful as it is. It's helped our home values. It's helped our standing in the world. I think that we want to make sure that we're not here to eliminate architectural control. But I think it's also important that homeowners, the people that are really the beneficiaries of architectural control, do not have a lot of say into the input of the ARB practices. It's mostly controlled by the developer, and that's the way it's been for the last 50 years, and I think something that a lot of people in the community are looking for improvement on. The development agreement is expiring this year, but it's not going to make any changes immediately to the architectural control system. That's really empowered through the covenants and through other practices. And I think at the end of the day, and I'll point this out, is clearly the only ways for the ARB functions to be turned over to another entity would be through negotiation with the developer, a covenant change that a majority of property owners sign up for, or a challenge in the courts. It's really, as we dug through it, it comes down to those 3 items. And I think the recommendations that we work towards throughout the end of this year will center around those items.
So clearly this is a topic of great community interest. Are you going to be seeking community input at some point?
Yes, our report is coming out this week. We're going to schedule a community meeting so that we can hear ideas and input from the community later in June. That's going to be available in person as well as on Zoom. And then we're going to do a second one later in July or middle of July to continue to hear a lot more from the community, get feedback on what we've written down so far before we move on to phase 2.
And maybe even another one after that if needed?
If there's demand for it, we will continue to listen. I think our next step after releasing this report is listening to those in the community.
And I would just add, I think one key point that the community needs to understand is the limitations of the work group. While we want community input to understand better what we've gotten right, what we've gotten wrong, what we've missed, what their thoughts are about how we handle this going forward, the work group is not a dispute resolution organization. If people have specific ongoing issues with regard to the ARB, that is not an issue that the work group is able to take on. That's simply outside the scope of our authority and responsibility. So we need to make that very clear that that's not part of this process.
Yeah. Our primary goal is to build consensus around a solution going forward.
And how successful do you think you're likely to be in that endeavor?
I think we will be. I think as more people understand exactly how things work, what works, what doesn't, what's happening, what's not, I think the solutions will become clear. I think education's a big piece of it. And then, frankly, once you have a consensus within the community, I think the actions of KICA, TOKI, the developer will follow.
Is December 4th some kind of drop dead date?
That is when the development agreement between the developer and the town of Kiawah Island expires. There are some aspects of the development agreement that do touch upon issues related to architectural control, but it won't change the basic legal requirement or legal authority that has existed for the developer that has delegated the ARB for the last 50 years. That's in the general covenants. That isn't addressed at all by the expiration of the development agreement.
Anything to add?
I think that says it.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. I'd like to encourage the community to take the time to watch this webcast, to attend the meeting at the end of June, to attend any follow-up meetings. This is, again, an issue that is of such interest and importance to the community that we want as much engagement as possible. So we appreciate upfront what you will be feeding back to us, and we appreciate you taking the time to watch this webcast.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madeleine.